Hello, I'm Regan, and before this video starts, I'm just letting you know that there may be swearing and that any threats that may occur are in-game threats. All of this was streamed live on my Twitch, so if you enjoyed, please subscribe for more. Anyways, enjoy the video.
Pickaxe go brr. Brr. Think I'm done with everything almost. I hate scaffolding so much. I hate it. I hate scaffolding. Every time I'm on scaffolding, it thinks I'm flying, so it kicks me. Okay. Done with that. Pretty much. Now I have to do those things. The roof is fixed. And now I have to figure out a design for the wall. And maybe the flooring. I think I should do the flooring. Oop. Didn't mean to do that.
You with the Ben Affleck shit and the Matt Damon everything else. Guess what?
Ah!
What the heck? Wait, what sound did I just come back to?
I just went. Ah! That's how you coming up and then you put your headset on. Chicken.
Oh, there we go. There's that. Oh, I'm about to connect back to the normal netherite mines again. Because I have my own kind of like big, because I have my netherite mine where I basically mine out chunk by chunk.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I actually know where this is. Wait, I know where I am in the netherite mines. This actually makes my way back quicker. I know where this is. Because it's like, you go pretty much straight down that way, and then you're at the main area in the netherite mines.
Mm.
I know where I am there. Nice.
Hello.
Hello, welcome back.
Thank you.
Angel made weird noises for my stream while we were gone.
No, I only did weird noise to you. Because that's how you put your headset on, and I was like, hee hee.
My nose just fake sneezed me. I muted so you guys didn't have to hear it, and then it said no.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. So with the loving strangers right next to Tommy. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the smell of pine trees and flowers and apple pies, and stepped off the path. He walked first, then ran, ducking under branches and shaking his feet out of the tangled undergrowth, tearing through the dim with only Wilbur's voice to guide him. Techno! Will!
Because of the
Close
story or because of
Stray
something
branches
else?
tugged at his clothes and his hair. With his sister's advice and from pure annoyance, Techno ripped a strip of cloth from his shirt sleeve and tied his hair back into a simple knot at the nape of his neck. It wasn't an elegant braid, but it would have to do. He continued running. Wilbur! He called again. Techno! Just to the right of him. Techno, over here! Techno! Techno fell against a tree, taking in what was before him. A strange dark line stood out in the dim, blacker than black, cut straight from the darkness of the lowest caves of the earth. It felt lonely. Standing beside it, wings tucked in close, was Filza and Wilbur. Come on, Wilbur said in a half smile on his face. You're late. Techno rushed to him and gave him a swift punch to the shoulder. Wilbur stumbled, almost falling back into whatever the black cut was before Techno caught him by the wrist and pulled him upright again. How many times do I have to lose you in a single day? Techno demanded, squeezing Wilbur's wrist just to make sure he was real. He was here. He wasn't part of a strange dreamscape. Wilbur rubbed sheepishly at his shoulder and said, I didn't really have a say in it. Keep close to me from now on, Techno ordered, releasing Wilbur after he was sure the pulse at his wrist was there. And you, he turned to Vilsa, ready to unleash his pent-up emotions on the nearest god available. But the fraught words died on his lips when he took in his old friend. You look different. Vilsa shrugged one shoulder. It's been a long few hours. You saw Tommy, Wilbur added by way of explanation. Is he okay? Techno asked, stepping towards Phil. Phil shook his head. We can talk about it later, he said, sounding strangled. Techno understood. It would take him years to speak about what happened on the road. For now, it was his own burden to carry alone. Someday, he'd share it, but not when the wound was too fresh, too hurting. Alright, Techno said. That's okay. So how the hell... how the hell are we getting out of here? He still had a score to settle and a prince to bury, after all. Wilbur nodded wordlessly towards the pulsing black scar in the air. Oh, said Techno. You have got to be kidding me. It's safe, Wilbur said. Say that again without looking so green and I might believe you. It's a cut through reality, Filsa said exasperately.
Yeah.
I know
I
you're
like.
close.
Yeah, it's like I'm like exasperated, but that also doesn't
Yeah.
feel right for that.
Watch, he said the right word. And
Yeah.
it's just a word we just don't know. Again.
Right.
Gah.
Why don't you make it speak out loud to me again?
There's a little
Ah,
dude.
Hit a button.
There's a button.
exasperated.
That's how it was exasperated.
Yeah, I was right.
Ah.
It means intensely irritated and frustrated.
Just didn't sound right in the sentence. That's why I was like, huh?
Um, it feels as said exasperated. Of course, it would not be a very comfortable experience. Wilbur scoffed. It felt like having my innards rearranged by a very excitable toddler. He heaved he heaved a resigned sigh as he faced the cot. I guess I'll go first. He threw a look at the other two behind him. See you on the other side, then. I'll follow soon, said Techno. Don't get lost again.
Hi, Akira.
Wilbur gave him a mocking salute before falling into the void. It swallowed him whole. Techno watched him disappear with a sinking feeling in his gut. Before a heartbeat had even passed, he was already moving forwards, intending to follow behind Wilbur as he promised. he would not let him out of his sight again. But before Techno could
We're
step
reading
through, a hand closed
Passerine
around his arm
while
and pulled
I'm
him back.
netherite
He
mining.
turned towards Phil's a complaint already
Um,
on his lips before he noticed the summer look on the other god's face. He really did
Okay.
look different. He was
Alright,
paler,
Faded.
somehow, and yet brighter. At the same time, like a young star silently basking in
Faded's
its
house just got
newfound
swatted,
brilliance.
apparently.
Techno, Phil said. We need
Um,
to talk.
So,
Wilbur
it's a
was
fan
looking unmade.
fiction.
That
A
was what it
Passerine
was.
is a fan
As he fell through the
fiction.
black, spiraling between what was real and what was imagined, drifting in the space between lie and truth, he felt himself being pulled apart and then pulled back together, born and then unborn, and then reborn and unmade. Esther's father had called it the crash, but that wasn't quite true. It was crashing and flying and crashing again, the euphoria of flight equaled by the pain of the collapse. It was agony. It was dawn. It was over. He hit the ground. Breathe it in, breathe it out. The air tasted bitter, like ash, like the dust on a guitar case sitting unopened for years. His ears were ringing, his vision blurry. There was nothing beyond the feel of cold snow under him. Coarse and biting, his muddled mind could grasp no thought other than, I need a blanket. He spat snow and blood out of his mouth and struggled upright, managing to get on his knees before he fell back again, with what a fight there was left in his body fleeing in, as his vision finally cleared, and he realized he was watching the end of the world. The sky was red, the city was burning. Fissures arched across the ground like lightning, chasm leading straight to the underworld as Wilbur looked on. The earth shook again and more cracks spread, one breaking open just a feet away from him. Shit, Wilbur thought, scrambling back, his heart in his throat. Shit, shit, shit. The only structure that remained relatively intact was the church. And standing at its bell tower, at the eye of the storm, was none other than Dream. He didn't seem to notice Wilbur's reappearance. How could he? In the same way that giants paid no heed to ants, the god had bigger affairs to tend to than a single mortal standing at the wreckage of the only universe he had ever known. Dream paced around the circumference of the bell, trailing a hand on its bronze surface, only pausing whenever another earthquake hit. It took Wilbur a few dizzy beats to realize he was causing it. With a tilt of his head and flick of his fingers, the green god was slowly breaking the world apart, remaking it into another version, another stage. Wilbur barely registered the thud of another person falling beside him. What the? Wilbur turned to watch Techno blink groggily at the scene before him, waking from a dream and straight into a nightmare. He already looked so exhausted, pink hair tied loosely back from a face that had seen better days. He was so pale. The only color on his face, the dark lines under his eyes. How long had they been fighting? It felt like years. It was only hours. What's going on? Techno croaked.
Yep.
It's the apocalypse. Wilbur. What's going on? Techno croaked. The apocalypse. Wilbur returned. Techno groaned as he fell back against the ground, burying his face in his arm. 5 minutes, he said. Let me have 5 goddamn minutes without having to deal with this. We don't have much time, Father said. Wilbur raised his head to see his father touching down on the ground beside him, soundless as the night. His eyes scanned the broken city around him, before settling on Techno and Wilbur's discarded weapons.
Everything's fine.
Okay. And because Wilbur could never catch a fucking break, they were sitting leagues away on a slice of earth separated by dozen criss-crossing lines of fissures. When do we ever have enough time? Techno's voice was muffled by the snow. 5 minutes! That's all I'm asking! Wilbur groaned in sympathy. Even as he accepted his father's offered hand and got to his feet, he reached down and grabbed the back of Techno's tunic, hauling him up so that Techno leaned on him while he leaned on his father. The three of them, exhausted in all sense of the word, watched as Dream continued breaking and shattering everything that no longer fit whatever story he wanted to tell next. I'll get your weapons, Father said, and Wilbur expected him to fly away to retrieve them, but instead he simply snapped his fingers, and Wilbur's sword and bow, and Techno's trident and chain whip clattered at their feet. Wilbur glanced with shock at their father. When did you learn that nifty little trick? Must have picked it up somewhere, Father muttered as Techno wordlessly rearmed himself. Wilbur bent to retrieve his bow and rapier, surprised to find that its quiver was filled once more with new arrows, with gleaming obsidian feathers as fletching. These gods, Wilbur thought. I'll never understand their silly games. This is it then, Techno said as he spun his shrine idly between his fingers. This ends here. Everything ends here. How do we do this? Wilbur asked. The last time we thought we cornered him, he just shoved us into some other realm and went into his merry way. I won't give him the chance this time, Father said sternly. Sweat was beading on Techno's forehead despite the cold, but his words were steady when he said, We'll be your sport, Phil. Now go. Not yet, Father said, turning to Wilbur. He lifted his cloak and reached into its inner pocket, pulling out a silver necklace. He pressed it into Wilbur's palm and leaned in to whisper into Wilbur's ear. Find what is sacred to you, and never let go. If you take any advice from your old man, let it be that. Why does it feel like you're saying goodbye? Wilbur whispered back, curling his fingers around the necklace. Father stepped back with a small, sad smile. I'm not, he said. It's just in case. Just in case? Wilbur demanded. In case of what? Another one's shoulders shrugged. Worst case scenario. Wilbur placed the necklace into his pocket. Sure, he said. Let's lie to ourselves. It should be easy. We've been doing it for years, haven't we? Father blinked and looked as if he were about to say something else, but then the earth trembled again. A harsh laugh cut through the cold air. The three of them turned to see the green god had finally caught sight of them. He stood at the edge of the bell tower, balanced on the balls of its feet, as if the dizzying height was of no consequence to him. Even from so far below, Wilbur could see the jagged line of a smile carved into his face. Hello, he called out. Didn't expect you back so soon, I admit. He spread his arms to take in the chaos all around them. But I guess destruction is more fun when there are witnesses. Wilbur closed his hand around the hilt of his rapier. Despite the ache in his soul, he was ready. With Techno on one side and his father on the other, there was little else he needed. The northern winds whistled past them, and if Wilbur listened carefully, he could almost hear the song they were trying to sing. There were no words left to be said. They had done this 1,000 times before. They took off, Phil to the skies and Techno and Wilbur rushing across the ruined grounds. Phil would get to the tower first, but the other two would not be far behind.
Shiv scared me.
Oh my god.
Hi, Shiv. Hi. And yeah, Faded, go to the hospital. Get your nose checked out, please. I don't know if you guys have been following what the hell's been happening in my chat at all, but apparently Faded's house got SWAT raided. Apparently. SWAT is like advanced police.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. Thank you for bread, Shiv. Bye, guys.
Yeah. Okay. They leapt over chasm after chasm, skidding on snow and falling to their knees, but still moving forwards, heading towards the church. Every jump rattled Techno's bones and made him want to cry out, but he pushed it all down. The world was being torn apart by an all-powerful, bored little shit. Techno had no right to complain about something as inconsequential as potentially sprained ankle. And then suddenly, it wasn't inconsequential. It was an easy jump. He could have made it, should have made it, but instead he came up short, an inch shy of safety. Technoblade fell quietly. There was a sharp tug on his shoulder, and his shoulder almost popped out of his socket as his plunge was abruptly halted. He looked up, his legs dangling in an open air, and found Wilbur leaning over the edge with his hands around Techno's wrist, his only lifeline. Gods, Wilbur cursed, struggling with Techno's weight. Pull yourself up, Techno! Techno's boots scrambled for purchase against the Chesson's face. He could feel Wilbur's hands slipping, but Techno knew Wilbur would more readily let both of them fall than let go. That was how Techno knew he'd already found family again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his left foot found a safe spot to carry most of his weight. With some awkward maneuvering, Techno managed to haul himself over the edge, breathing heavily with his hands on his knees, but on solid ground once more. What the hell? Wilbur demanded. You and your grand speeches about never losing me again, but did you ever stop and ask if I could afford to lose you? Get a fucking grip! Techno pushed hair out of his eyes and blinked slowly at the furious king. Okay, Techno said quietly. I'm sorry. Are you alright then? Wilbur asked, anger quickly evaporating into concern. We have to go help Father. I don't think he needs our help, Techno thought, squinting up at the bell tower from his angle. He couldn't see much, but he could hear it all. The clash of steel on steel and the distant tusk of two godly beings absolutely trying their best to kill each other. I'm alright, assured Techno, and even if Wilbur didn't seem to believe him, they had no other choice but to soldier on. They were off again, leaping from a broken chunk of earth to another, albeit a bit more cautiously, constantly looking over their shoulders to make sure the other had made it safely. When they finally made it to the foot of the bell tower, the pain in Techno's ankle had reached a boiling point and only intensified when Wilbur pushed the tower door open. They were met with a staircase spiraling into the sky. I hate this, Techno declared. Okay. I hate every aspect of this, and I would like to quit and be a humble farmer far from here. Wilbur stared at him, giving him 2 seconds to follow through on his words. Are you done? Wilbur said. Because in case you haven't noticed, the end of all things is currently being orchestrated right above our heads. I regret ever meeting you. Wilbur snorted as he stared up at the stairs. You say that as if it isn't your dry humor that rubbed off on me. They took the steps 2 at a time, round and round, until Techno couldn't remember life before the climb. It wasn't until they were halfway there when Techno's knees finally gave up and he slumped against the brick wall, panting and biting back a scream of frustration. He was holding them back. It was the most important battle of his damn life, and he was holding them back. Wilbur, standing a few steps up from Techno, looked back with furrowed brows. What's wrong? He asked. You look pale. This isn't like you. He took the sweat dripping down Techno's face, the exhaustion evident in his trembling shoulders and liquid limbs. Techno? You're right, Techno murmured, too tired to care about what he was saying. I'm not myself. I'm not even a fraction what I used to be. I hate this fragile body and all its whining and its pity demands. He looked up Wilbur's eyes and met Wilbur's eyes, willing him to understand because there was no way in hell he could ever speak the words himself. He didn't have the vocabulary for it. I hate being this weak, Wilbur. Wilbur's mouth fell open in a silent "oh" as the realization finally hit him. Before all this would have been effortless, the leaping, the running, the climbing, something as small as a sprained ankle or a healing stab wound would have been no hindrance at all, just little details to shake off like bothersome bugs. But that was before. This was now. Techno? Wilbur whispered. You're mortal? It had been written in an ancient script, in a book that looked exactly like all the others in the forgotten library. Heavy bound and dust-covered, Phils had flipped gingerly through it, afraid that one wrong move could turn the fragile paper into ash, and had found the words in the last pages. You seek power, reader, it had said, but all the things come with a price. Power for power, divinity for divinity. If you wish to be God among gods, one must be the vessel, the other the sacrifice. Phils had promised it would be their last resort, only until push came to shove, Techno had said, and the green god had definitely shoved. And so Phils had pulled Techno back, and the two of them had talked, one god to another, for the last time. They had both known it was the time just as they had known the first day on the battlefield of ice and snow, arrows flying overhead and both of them lit from within by divine fire. That their roads had crossed and there was no going back. Technoblade, Blood God, and Emperor had offered his scarred hand to Filsa, Angel of Death and God of Freedom, and they had clasped each other's fingers like old friends did after long separation. For a moment there was only the two of them in that forest of dreams, and when Filsa whispered the ancient words, it almost sounded like a solemn prayer. A prayer to the god Techno used to be, and to the god Filsa was becoming. Towards the end, Techno's hand had betrayed his pain. It shook just a bit as his veins burned gold, turning him into a gilded patchwork, half mortal, half god. His very soul caught in the crossfire between mortality and divinity. His breaths came quick and labored, and still feels and murmured, slipping silent apologies between the primordial
Yep.
spell. When the final words was said, Techno had fallen to his knees before Filza, a wicked reversal of fortunes, but he did not let go. Technoblade forsook his godhood without protest. There was barely a struggle, barely a scream of agony. It had been his sacrifice to make, and he would be damned if he'd let himself regret it. He had wrestled with martyrdom,
Spell it.
Martyrdom.
Martyrdom. Martyrdom? Because it's the first part is martyr. I know that's how you pronounce it. So it'd be martyrdom, I guess.
Martyrdom. Okay. He had wrestled with martyrdom and won. When Techno stood again, he was human, simple and breakable, with numbered years and numb hands. Inside him there was a hollow pit where his godhood used to rest. He was going to make a landfill out of it. And Filsa was awake. Now he stood in a bell tower overlooking a ruined city. Fires raged until the horizon, burning away homes and streets that once teemed with easy life. Families and friends gathered in bunches like sweet-smelling bouquets, but like flowers unaware of the gardener plucking hands, they had existed in the shadow, being too large to comprehend. Their lives already decided for them, all their tragedies and loves, their hopes and their secrets laid into predetermined place on the green god's mosaic. But that would end today, because Filsa was his antithesis. Antithesis?
The antithesis. It's a hard word.
I feel like I got
Antithesis?
attacked by a word.
Angel.
Is that it?
It is, yes.
Antithesis. Okay. And we're going to set everybody free. The bell tolled as he and Dream continued their deadly dance around the tower, swords meeting and then unmeeting. Dream must have sensed the change. He must have seen it in the way Filsa moved, taking each step with utmost confidence that the ground would meet him and not the other way around. He must have felt it in a renewed strength behind Filsa's blows. He must have known Filsa was still holding back. For the first time since their encounter, the Green God had the wits to finally be unnerved. One mistake was all it took, a misstep in their eons-old walls. The Green God swung too early, his sword cutting through air as Filsa simply ducked out of the way. The bell shuddered as Dream's blade bit into the bronze and stuck there. As Dream tried to pull it free, Filsa kicked at the knees and sent him spinning against one of the pillars holding up the tower roof, unarmed. Dream stumbled against the pillar, nearly toppling over the edge of the tower, and before he could regain his balance, Filsa swung at him. Dream managed to duck just in time, but Filsa's sword cut through the pillar behind him as easily as a hot knife through butter. The pillar buckled and fell apart, and the roof of the tower began leaning, almost halfway to caving in on itself. The Green God whistled as he jumped back from Filsa's advance. Listen, Filsa. I'm done listening to you. Filsa swung again, this time managing to nick Dream's forearm. Brilliant red blood ran from the cut. It did not heal. Dream looked down at his wounded arm, his brows furrowed with confusion. Why did that hurt? He asked no one in particular. He raised his eyes to Phil, and his confusion turned to fury. What have you done? The very thing you tried to keep me from doing, said Filsa, raising his sword above his head. Now hold still, Dream. Let me take everything away from you as you took everything from me. The green god made to raise his hand, perhaps to conjure himself a new sword or attempt to throw Filza into another dream. Filza's hand shot out, gripping Dream's wrist and twisting. He leaned in to watch the other god's discomfort turn to pain, turn to panic as he struggled to free himself from Filza's crushing hell. Little spider, Filza whispered, caught in your own web. You think this faces me? Dream demanded, still trying to pull his wrist away. Do you think I'm afraid of you? The angel of death looked at the green god with the eyes of sun taken too soon. Yes, he said. I think you are. Dream snarled, an animal cornered. You forgot. You've tried this before. You've always failed. Always. Aha. But that was before I came to realize what you were. Filza made sure Dream could see every inch of his expression, every depleted line, every mark the long years had etched into his skin. You would have us think you're doing all this, the rewrites, the infinite loop, just for the fun of it. But you don't really have the luxury of indulging yourself, do you? Because you're afraid every second of every day of every life you are. And what? You are. Sorry. You are afraid. You've known me since you were made. You've known since your first breath that I was the only creature capable of breaking you. And before I could even try, before you gave me any reason to, you ran. You pretended it was all some silly little game to keep your heart from exploding out of your chest with fear. And you ran. You sculpted worlds, rewrote histories just to keep me from seeing you squirm because you're a coward. That's what you are, Dream. You're a goddamn coward. Take that back, the green god whispered. Take that back right now. Make me, challenged Filza. Oh wait, you can't. There are equal forces once upon a time, the spider and the songbird, control and freedom, the two oldest powers in the universe, the first of the gods maintaining a delicate balance until one tipped the scale. Filza was merely tipping it back. You bought yourself some time, said Filza. Eons of it. But the clock is ticking and there's nowhere else to run. The game is over. Dream was breathing heavily, his emerald eyes wide. You can't hurt me. Oh, wait. Nope. You can hurt me, he said. But you can't kill me. You can't. That's not how we do this. We'll always be hunting each other. You have the upper hand now, but not forever. You're right, Filza losing his hold on Dreams, allowing him to step away. The green god gave him a look of mistrustful confusion as he rubbed his wrist where Filza's hand had left a scorch mark. I can't kill you. If I did, you'll simply be reborn and the chase will continue. I know that now. And I also know what I have to do. He glanced over Dream's shoulder and the other god turned to his heel to follow Filza's line of sight. When he finally saw what Filza meant, he whirled around with an incredulous, almost fearful expression. You can't be serious, Dream said, voice trembling. You can't be here. Then regaining a bit of confidence, he said, No, you really can't be, because I just break out. I can carve my way out, little by little. Not if you have someone watching you, Filza said simply. What little hope the green god still had died in his eyes. You're an idiot, he declared with equal parts of disbelief and alarm. He moved towards Filza, grabbing a fistful of his tunic and shaking him. It would be the closest to begging he would stoop to. Do you have any idea what I would lose? What you would lose? All things come with a price, Filza said with surprise by the sudden burn of his tears in his eyes. And I pay it. So they don't have to. I'm done running away from my promise. I'm done begging the stars for answers. I brought the stars low, Dream, and they will do my bidding for me. Why does it feel like you're saying goodbye? Wilbert asked. Because he was. He'd said his farewells even if he was the only one who would truly know it. He'd pressed one last gift into his son's hand, but his eyes had been on Techno's as he'd spoken of never letting go. So Techno might understand in hindsight 10 days or 10 years from now that Filza was leaving Wilbur to him and him to Wilbur. Behind the green god, far below in the middle of the broken earth was a cut in the universe, a jagged gate to a place of unmaking. It stood waiting for a green-eyed god and his keeper, a prison of infinite void for the two loneliest gods on earth. Feels like gripped Dream's wrist once more, manacles of flesh and blood. It's been you and me since the beginning, Dream, Philza said solemnly, and it will be me and you in the end. Father? Philza froze. What are you doing? What are you doing? Wilbur repeated. Philza turned slowly towards the tower threshold, where Wilbur stood with one hand on the jamb and the other around Techno's shoulder. Wilbur was the only force keeping Techno upright at the moment. By the look on Philza's face, he must have expected Techno to weigh Wilbur down more with the novelty of his mortality, ignorant to the fact that Techno's sheer stubbornness was more than enough to fuel him to get up that tortuous flight of stairs. Sure, Techno felt as if each step had been hewn into his damned tower with every intent to antagonize him and him specifically. But he was here now, witnessing the Phil's about to make another undoubtedly big mistake, and that was all that mattered. Yes, Dream said, all form of smugness wiped clean from his face. Tell me exactly what you're doing, Phil. Where are you about to go? Shut up! Wilbur snapped, his eyes never wavering from his father. This doesn't concern you, you nosy piece of shit. Father, Philza, a god among gods, among men, flinched at the harshness in Wilbur's tone. What did he mean? Where are you going? When Philza didn't respond, a look of horrified fury dawned on Wilbur's face. You're leaving, Wilbur said as if the act of saying it might make it false. You're actually leaving me again. Will, Philza began loosening his grip on Dream for just 1 second. Techno knew a thing or two about the stupid mistakes. That was one of them. The moment Philza's hands slackened, Dream pulled free and was gone, taking to the skies in his invisible wings. It was almost comical, really. To think that the god that had stood over them so arrogantly just hours before now scrambled to escape the second everyone's backs were turned. If it was Philza's ascension he had been the cause of the shift, the Techno would gladly sacrifice his immortality 10 times over just to see the green bastard scared shitless. Fuck! Philza cursed under his breath as he spread his own wings, about to give chase, but before he could even lift 1 foot off the tower floor, Wilbur and Techno had already taken their positions. It took 4 seconds. 1. Wilbur knocked an obsidian-fledged arrow into his bow, drawing his arm back as he aimed towards the lone figure in the burning sky. 2. The linked iron chains of Techno's whip rattled as it unfurled from his hand like a metal ribbon. He took one end of it, spun it in a vicious circle, the wind whirling around him, lifting his hair from his face. He was almost delirious with pain, and he did not have a fraction of the strength he used to have. But if Wilbur was still standing, then Techno would be right beside him. 3. Wilbur breathed in, out. His hands were steady and sure. He was a king, and he would surrender to no god. 4. Wilbur let the arrow fly. It sang through the air, sank past the green god's head, not close enough to make him bleed, but close enough to make him pause. It was all they needed. In that moment of his foolish hesitation, Technoblade swung his whip out like a fisherman casting a hook into a deep dark. It blazed like a comet in reverse, arching up into the shattered sky instead of towards the burning ground, just as made metal. It cut around the heel of a god and made him mortal in his fear. And Techno had any godliness left in himself. He used it all in one last act of retribution. He had known, of course, that even the weakest human was able to do impossible things, godly things, in moments of panic. He had heard stories of fathers lifting whole trees off their children, of people standing between the lovers and wild wolves. He had witnessed soldiers fighting to their bitter ends over the king that did not love them and the kingdom that would forget their name the moment a new battle began. A young boy had stood before him in a wisteria-covered pavilion and asked to be taught the art of war to keep his brothers safe. Humans, Techno thought. We're a stubborn bunch, aren't we? And he threw the spider down from the stars. Dream hurtled back towards them, an angel fallen and falling still, and Techno swung him straight towards the bell. There was a cacophony?
Cacophony, yeah.
Cacophony as the bell's binding snapped and crashed into the floor, still ringing, still singing. In its dented surface lay the god in repose, blood staining his golden hair. Unconscious, defeated, at last, Techno let out a shaky breath. Well, he said, that was easy, and promptly passed out. Wilbur let his bow clatter to the ground and caught Techno before he could follow it. Laughter exploded out of Wilbur as he pulled Techno's limp body against him. We did it! He exhaled against Techno's hair, looking down at the god laying broken in dented bronze. We actually fucking did it! Techno? He shook Techno. Techno, hey, we did it! There was no response. Wilbur looked up in panic and found his father's wary eyes on him. No! The frenzied euphoria of an unexpected victory died swiftly on Wilbur's lips as he pulled Techno close to him, tucking his warm, fragile, mortal body into the cradle of his arms. Techno's chin digging painfully into Wilbur's shoulder. Wilbur was suddenly very aware of the extent of damage on him. Wounded shoulders and a knife to the back, courtesy of Wilbur himself. A killing blow for you would be a scratch for me, Techno had said. But he said it when he was immortal and untouchable. Techno? Wilbur asked again, shaking him lightly, unable to think of the world without his best friend. His newfound mortality should have given them years at least together, not minutes, not seconds. Techno, this isn't funny anymore. He looked up at his father. Tell him it isn't funny anymore. The silence was thunderous, and then, in its wake, there was a muffled groan. Ugh! 5 minutes! Just 5 goddamn minutes! Wilbur pulled back to see that Techno's eyes were wide open. If I weren't so sure you were halfway to hell already, Wilbur said slowly, I would expedite
Yeah.
the process right now. Does hell offer a hot meal and a warm bed? Asked Techno. If so, please send me there. I deserve it. Wilbur shoved Techno off him, unsure whether to laugh or cry or scream. When he turned to his father, he looked just as lost. That was, father said as Techno righted himself, a very shit thing to do, you little bastard. Oh, the weary mirth fled instantly from Techno's face, chased by unbridled anger as he whirled on father. You want to speak to me of doing very shit things? Father flinched, but looked as if he had already expected the outburst. His blue eyes slid to Wilbur, and they looked so much like Tommy's in his final moments that Wilbur did not know whether to look away or mesmerize them. Father's hand around Dream's wrist, Dream's panicked flight. The dark doorway into a realm between realms still standing open far below
Welcome
in the shadows
back.
of the bell tower. You're actually leaving me again, Wilbur accused him before they were swept up in the dramatics of Dream's escape, their presumed triumph. What triumph was there to celebrate when father had not proven him wrong? The cold settled back into Wilbur's bones. Where are you going? Wilbur demanded. Will, father began, running a shaking hand through his hair. You are not supposed to be here for this. He met Techno's glare. Neither of you were. Techno crossed his arms. The mortal would change a god. If he had given anyone else the look he was giving father, they would have withered away into dust. And what exactly is this, Phil? Techno asked, his voice hoarse. The angel of death did not frown or make excuse. He simply told them what Wilbur had always wanted from him, the truth. I'm going away. Far, far away. Philza continued, unable to stop now that he'd started. Maybe it was the way that Will was looking at him, open and undefended, as if he no longer feared, but instead expected this betrayal. Maybe it was the way Techno stood protectively in front of him, as if Philza was someone Wilbur needed protection from. Maybe it was that, despite her earlier tearless farewell, deep down Philza knew it would come down to this. No subterfuge?
Centrifuge? No. Spell it?
Subterfuge.
One more time?
Subterfuge.
Yep, never seen that word before.
Great. I'm not crying, you are. Subterfuge is a seed used in order to achieve one's goal. Not goal. No subterfuge. No fake remarks, just honesty this time. No matter how harsh and painful, I'll take Dream to a place where he can't hurt you, can't hurt anyone ever again. And I'm going and I'm going to lock the door behind me and throw away the key. It's the only way to make sure he can't come back. The only way, Wilbur asked. The only way to end the reign of an all-powerful deity just so happens to involve you leaving me in the dust for... How many times is it now, Philza? How many times are you going to leave me before you even say a proper fucking goodbye? We already... Don't give me that shit. Wilbur snapped his brown eyes furious. He'd gotten his eyes from his mother, the fury from his father. A few words of wisdom and a piece of fucking jewelry does not count as a goodbye. In any goddamn universe, I fucking asked you if it was a goodbye. Goodbye then, said Philza. Is that what you wanted? Did you want me to say the words? Did you want me to tell you that I would give up air and life and open skies if it meant I got to stay with you? But if you want honesty, Wilbur, here it is. You know the face of sacrifice well. You have already made the calculations in your head and you already know this is the right call. The only call. You already know this will hurt like hell, but it will be a necessary hurt. This is my blue valley, Wilbur. He saw the words land, held it as if he'd taken a dagger to his own heart. Wilbur had the look of a man standing at the gallows, but it was not his execution, and that tortuous sorrow in his eyes, torn between grieving and refusing to believe there was anything to grieve at all. That was from Philza too. Through it all, Techno had stood in a stoic silence, content on making Philza feel the weight of his anger without having to say a word, but now he opened his mouth to speak. But it wasn't a demand or a dry remark or a sharp reproach that fell out in quiet, hesitant syllables. It was a question. Wilbur, can I see that necklace? His anguish momentarily clouded by confusion, Wilbur reached into his pocket and pulled out Philza's last gift, the only remnant that would remain of him. Sitting on Wilbur's palm, dangling from an iron chain, was a single bright green emerald. I'm sorry, Philza began. I'm sorry that leaving you is the only way I can save you. I'm sorry that you both fought so hard, so long, just to say goodbye again. I'm sorry that I can't be here for the aftermath. I'm sorry there is too much left unsaid between us. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to say all this before, but I hope I can make it up to you now. He tried for a smile, even as tears blurred his vision, turned everything into a hazy smudge. Well, Techno, and then arms were going around him, putting him into a warm embrace. For a moment there was only a tangle of limbs and 3 beating broken hearts indiscriminate from one another. Clarity came in bittersweet waves. It was Wilbur's face buried in his left shoulder, Techno's arms around them both. It was Techno's foot on his toes and the pommel of Wilbur's rapier digging into his gut. It was tragic and it was clumsy. It was goodbye. It won't be forever, Philza promised through his sobs. I swear you both I will find a way back to you someday. There will be nothing to fear anymore, and I'll find you again, even if it takes me eons. None of them said what they were all thinking. Wilbur didn't have eons, and neither did Techno now. But they knew what he meant anyway, and they believed him. Someday, they would hang on to that promise. They would take it to their graves. If there's one thing, Wilbur said, pulling back to look Philza in the eyes, then I want you to know I forgive you. His face fractured into a million different emotions. I forgive you, Dad. Thank you, Phil whispered. Thank you, my boy. And Techno only had his silence, but it said more than Philza could in 1,000 years. He stepped back from them, his oldest son and his oldest friend. When Techno began swaying on his feet, Wilbur wordlessly wrapped his arms around the former gods, and they stood there together, leaning on each other. Philza's heart was free. He gave them a nod. Techno looked away to wipe furiously at his eyes. Philza had this stifled laugh. Stubborn until the very end, aren't you, my friend? It was time. The god of freedom turned towards the boy, sleeping on a broken bell. Sleeping, or waiting, or dreaming. Whichever explanation would hurt least for him. Philza gathered the green god into his arms as he had once borne the boy of his youngest son at his deathbed, as he had once carried Wilbur to bed when he was smaller and the world was only the hallway from Lyrae to his childhood bedroom. He walked to the very edge of the tower with only a young king and a new mortal to mourn him. He spread his wings, obsidian feathers gleaming in the dying fires of the last city he would ever fail to protect. And then he flew. He did not look back. The wind was at his face, cool and cutting, but he had never tasted anything sweeter. When he began his descent straight towards the gate to its final fate, he felt the green god stir slightly in his arms. A child disturbed from a beautiful dream. He might have whispered the name, but it was lost to the air. God, such a big word for such a small thing. They were the beginning, and they would be the end. Prologue and epilogue. The void rushed towards them. Filza closed his eyes. It was better this way. He would get to control the darkness. It was his call, his term, his sacrifice. I'm sorry, Tommy, he thought, one last tear slipping down his ancient face, but I'll be seeing you soon. They entered the void together, the gate closed behind them. And the universe shifted. The shift was felt by every soul. It was felt by every rock and every blade of grass, every flowing river and every tree looking over a lonely house at the end of the long road. A chimney grown with ivy.
Your mom.
Hey!
Oh no. I don't think so. She's still laughing.
Sounds great. It was felt by every beast in the forest and every fish in the sea and every bird now grieving a fellow wanderer of the skies. It was felt by those awake and those hunting and those deep in hibernation and those spinning their webs from branch to branch, creating connections where once there was only open air. It was felt by the deer caught between the wolf's jaw, in final moments extended into eternity as the entire world, the entire universe held its breath. It was felt by every warrior in combat, every monarch in their gilded thrones, every smith with their cheeks warm from the fire of their forges. Every child stumbling through their mother's garden, every painter seated at their easel, every sailor at sea, every traveler on their way home. It was felt by an old neighbor looking at the shop of the kind girl who always had been so kind to him, and signs to that door. Closed indefinitely, it said, but the neighbor knew it would be closed forever. And still he'd come, day after day. His wife was gone, and so was the kind girl, but the flowers, oh, they still needed watering. It was felt by God in a valley beside him was a freshly dug grave with only a sort of pure obsidian to mark its place among the dead. The God had always known that he would one day stay alone. Once there was three, and now there is one. He lost one of them to love, and the other to fear. And some days he wondered if there was any different when pain always came in the wake of love, when every devotion led to the burial ground, when every dream was a nightmare sleeping. Would it be worth loving at all? Yes, said the dirt underneath his fingernails, testimony to his lonely grave digging. Yes, said the wind coming in from the north. Yes, said the first drop of rain striking his cheek like a cold reminder to seek shelter, like a gentle kiss from two lost friends. Yes, it would. It was felt by soldiers knocking on the door of a home he could no longer recognize. When his sister opened the door, he swore she didn't recognize him either. But then she threw her arms around him, sewing into his dirty shirt, and they fell into the wooden floors that carried the weight of their shared childhoods. In the scratches and dents, he held her and cried and was known. It was felt by a young king standing on a bell tower at the heart of a city of snow and ashes. A green stone gleamed in at his throat, heavy with a history he would someday be told when his last storyteller was ready. It was felt by the storyteller. The wheel was broken at their feet. They were free. They were free. They were free. Wilbur leaned his weary head against Techno's shoulder. Let's go home, he whispered. Techno nodded. Home. He repeated as if the word as a new discovery. And as he watched an aurora blaze to life above them, a symphony of reds and golds and greens twisting through the heaves, through the heavens, an impossibility of color, nothing short of divine magic. The sky was singing. Techno turned to the king, but his face was upturned and aglow. A child truly captivated by the pretty lights, the heaviness of his own heart momentarily forgotten as he looked up the brilliance of their world, the world his father had saved. The curtains fell on the two brothers illuminated. They buried him under the weeping willow, and they replanted the garden around him, one rose bush at a time. Wilbur leaned against a simple gravestone as he turned his guitar. It bore a name, and the only title that had ever mattered to him, brother and son. I'm not nervous, said Wilbur as he continued tinkering with the instrument on his lap. He flinched as a rather discordant note played before continuing. I mean, I shouldn't be. Whatever happens today, I would deserve it. That's how justice works, right? Finally satisfied with his strings, Wilbur strummed a few notes before he settled back against the grass. But I didn't come here to talk about that. I want to play you a song. He grinned at the sunlight streaming through the branches. I finally finished it. It took a while. A full year, drawled an all too familiar voice. Of banging around the music room and threatening to suffocate me in my sleep if I interfere with his artistic process. Wilbur glared good-naturedly at the man coming towards him a filing case in hand. Techno had grown into mortality better than Wilbur had expected. There were still times that Techno forgot he had human needs and human limitations, but Wilbur was there, as he always had been, and always would be, to remind him. Other than that, he forgot to eat on a regular schedule or fought to spar with royal guards that would no longer be easy targets for him. He had thrived. He had begun filling his tunics, and his wounds from the final confrontation were now just a part of his tapestry of scars. Settling on the other side of the gravestone, anyone looking out from the windows of the castle would only see the head, advisor, and right hand of the king, with his old-fashioned poofy sleeves and pink hair braided down his back, silently plucking at his violin. I was just saying, Wilbur said, whatever the verdict, we'd, we'd, we'd accept it. Techno finished, brows scrunched, in serious contemplation at his instrument. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to be scared. That's why we're here, aren't we? He threw a grin at Wilbur across the strings. We're getting you a distraction. I'm not scared, Wilbur said, and it was the truth. I know there's a chance that the past 2 years of atoning might not be enough, and I know it will never be enough. Then it's a good thing you're not the one voting, Techno said simply. It's a people's call, Wilbur. We don't have any say in the matter, for better or for worse. He tapped the end of his bow against the gravestone almost absently before raising it to his violin. At the end of the day, you're either king or you aren't, and if they decide the latter, then we'll go off into exile together and be twin fishermen in some little coast town somewhere. Or traveling bards. We could see the world together, you and I. I've already seen it, said Techno, but I suppose I wouldn't mind getting a second look. Wilbur laughed lightly. If that's our worst-case scenario, then there's really nothing to fear, is there? In response, Techno began playing the first notes of a familiar melody. Soon the lilting sound of his violin filled the garden, joined by distant bird song and the rustle of the wind through the creeping branches. It floated through the air, sharp and sweet. Techno's scarred fingers dancing across the fingerboard with an expertise that cost him long nights and strings snapping against his skin. His bow wrung magic from a delicate instrument so potent, Wilbur almost missed his own cue. Wilbur began playing his guitar, an accompaniment and an addition to the undercurrent to the keening sound of Techno's violin, one note after another. An orchestra of two performing for an audience of ghosts, following a score they wrote themselves. It was a sad song. It was a happy song. It was a song of a summer day from years ago, tucked between faded memories like a flower pressed between the pages of a heavy book. Now dusted off and clean. It was a song of an artist, mother and a warrior, father and sons. They were both. It was a song about the grass beneath Wilbur's feet and the sweet scent of flowers in his lungs. It was a song about war and a ruin and a grieved loss and the nightmares that still managed to take him by surprise even when he was awake and living anyway. It was a song about love and all the ways to say it, sacrifice and a cup of hot tea waiting at his desk, chess during the lazy days and music during the hard ones, leaving and staying, remembering, forgetting. It was a song about family, born or made or found or rediscovered. It was Tommy's grave at his back, mother's unfinished painting, father's necklace around his neck, and when the final note echoed off into the silence, there was no standing ovation, no ruckus?
Mm-hmm.
Applause. Just like the voices for the past 2 years. In 6 months and 3 days, there was only silence. It was the most beautiful sound. Wilbur quietly placed his guitar against Tommy's gravestone and turned to see Techno wordlessly returning his violin into its case. Everything had already been said. In the distance, the bells began to toll. It was time. Techno offered Wilbur a hand and pulled him to his feet. Together they walked towards their judgment. Hold on.
I have to leave in 30 minutes, and I still have to get ready for work.
Let's see. Yeah, God. I feel like this would take just a little longer.
Oh, we can try, because I'm just gonna walk lightly away, do some
Okay.
stuff. But I'm still hearing.
Okay. 2 years ago, Wilbert stood on the balcony and faced an army ready to die for him. I promised you peace on my father's crown, he said. And now I call you to war. This is nothing less than treason. Rest assured, I will be facing the consequences for it. And the soldier had called instead for their enemies' heads. More than half of them were dead now, leaving family and friends behind, alive and safe but mourning. And if there was anyone who understood the need to find some place to put down blame, it was Techno. There were no enemies left to defeat, no smiling gods to imprison, no hostile armies crossing the valley, and that was why Techno and Wilbur were standing in the hazy sunlight pouring in from the high windows of the very room where Wilbur had once been crowned. The room where he might have the crown taken from him for good. In front of them, seated in pews. What?
Imposed? Impure?
Pews.
Pews? Like church pews?
Could be. Seated in pews and on the floor, or leaning against marble columns or watching from balconies, were the people that would determine their fates. 100 blinking eyes, all unreadable, settled on the king and the general that had won both battle and war, at the cost of the very people they'd sworn to protect. Never mind that they saved them from a worse fate. Never mind they'd ensured the safety of the kingdom for generations to come, or that they'd spent the past 2 years working on pulling the threads of their nation back together. Those were excuses that neither Wilbur nor Techno would ever use against their people. Before them were 4 jars, each towering over one for each quadrant, west and east, south and north. For the past few months, those jars had come through every inch and corner of the kingdom, from the highest mountains to the smallest villages tucked into the deepest forest to the cold, snow-covered tundra towns. Messengers had knocked on the door of each house, presenting each person within, be the child or the adult, a decision. They would take a rock, any rock, be it from their own garden or from the river bed, or chipped from the threshold of their houses, and place it in the jar if they believed the king and the general had not done enough in service to the kingdom. A representative stood behind each jar, ready to tip it over, ready to count. Enough votes and Wilbur would step down from the throne, and Techno would go with him, and they'd live the rest of their mortal lives in exile, far from the kingdom they had planned and fought and lost their brother for. Techno glanced at Wilbur. Despite his earlier posturing, Techno could tell Wilbur was one tuck away from unraveling. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Techno, trying to look as calm and stoic for his people, spine straight and eyes ahead. Only could only Techno could see the apprehension behind them. He loved this kingdom. He loved its people. It wasn't just his father's kingdom, or his mother's, or Tommy's. He'd given everything of himself into it. It was his own flesh and blood. It was no longer a chore, or something he had succeeded in to earn a distant father's approval. It was the soldiers that had fought beside him in the valley. It was the half 100 people that had been willing to bring down a mountain on their foes and on himself. It was the scars on his skies and his sleepless nights and his pride and his home and his responsibility. He was born for this, stones and all. A judge draped in white robes called for their attention, as if the room had not been mind-numbing quiet for the past half an hour. Citizen of our fair kingdom, the judge said. We gather today to bear witness to the conclusion of the trial of King Wilbur, protector of the realm, ruler of the kingdom, and Technoblade, former general of the royal army. The people have spoken now. All there is left to do is listen. He turned to Wilbur, his gray eyebrows rising in question. Would you like one last thing to say, Your Majesty, before we tip the jars? Wilbur opened his mouth, closed it, began shaking his head. Techno stepped forward. The king, he began. As well as I, thank you all for coming here today. I see familiar faces in the crowd. I fought next to you, have seen your bravery firsthand, and I know what it costs all of you to come here today. He took a deep breath, met every eye on the floor, and mezzanine?
Spell?
Mezzanine.
Mezzanine. Yeah, it's something, yes. I recognize the word, but I think that's pretty much how you pronounce it. I don't really remember.
It felt like standing before the dead. It felt like reckoning long overdue. Everybody here lost someone to the war. A friend, a parent, a neighbor, and you know what your king lost too. Though we are united in our loss, that does not excuse the lapse in my and Wilbur's judgments. We made mistakes, deadly ones. We believe ourselves invincible and were too late to act against the encroaching enemy. And you all paid for a price that should have been ours alone. Whatever you have all decided today, we will call it justice. That's all. When Techno stepped back, Wilbur caught at his sleeve. He anticipated a dry remark about his unexpected diplomacy
Mm-hmm.
and was surprised when Wilbur simply muttered, "Thank you." Techno nodded hesitantly at him, confused as to what there was to be thankful for. After all, he was only doing his job. The judge read out more legal jargon
Mm-hmm.
that Techno had already heard 100 times before, and then, with the very hands he used to put the crown on Wilbur's head, he gestured for the jars to be overturned. They looked like faces, they gleamed like urns. Wilbur's hand slipped into Techno's, his bitten down nails digging into Techno's knuckles. Techno closed his eyes. He did not know which gods would still listen to him, so he prayed to them all. The war god, dream, Philsa, exile, or exoneration. It was out of his hands. He would be ready for both. Techno waited for the clatter of stones on marble. It never came. The boy who had come of age in blood and fire stood before a lake with his fist curled gently around a stone. The surface of the lake was calm and still, a mirror of the sky above it, and Tubbo wondered what it would feel like to float in it, to swim in sunlight. By this time, in a city far from here, the king and the general Tubbo had followed into war would be counting the votes of those who wanted them gone. Tubbo ran his thumb along the smooth edge of stone in his hand, turning it idly between his fingers as he looked out at the lake. It would freeze over soon. When winter came, Tubbo would be ready then. He pulled his hand back and threw with all his might. The stone skipped once, twice, thrice across the surface before sinking into the blue sky, leaving ripples that disappeared in a blink of an eye, and the lake was still once more. Tubbo grabbed the axe that hung from his hip. It was starting to rust, and constant use had worn away the handle, but it would hold for just a bit more. It was a familiar, reliable weight in his hand, and he swung it beside him as he walked towards the forest. He needed more firewood to keep his sister warm. Time unfurled like a ribbon. They filled their days with mundane problems, untuned instruments, teeth turning cold, and weeds needing plucking. The dutiful benevolent? Ben- I know this word, I just don't know. Benevolent. That one. King and his right hand, who was struggled to stay awake during half of the political meetings and spent the other half actively antagonizing sycophants, as he deemed too irksome. Wilbur publicly proclaimed that there was nothing amusing about Techno's threatening to burn the pompous wig off a merchant trying to lobby trade routes away from local vendors, but his eyes had gleamed with the promise of later laughter. In the spring, the two of them went down the orchard and spent their days in friendly rivalry over who picked the most fruit. Most years Techno won, if only because Wilbur was often distracted by a woman with long, curling hair as red as the apples in her basket. It took him 2 years to ask her name, another 2 to ask her to marry him. Her name was Sally, and she said yes. When their first child was born, a baby boy with the color of Tommy's last sunset, Wilbur took him into his arms without hesitation. He pressed his tear-stained cheeks against his son's warm skin and whispered, "I will love you forever," over and over until he was sure his son knew it. And the son would grow up under no one's shadow, calling Wilbur dad and Techno uncle in a kingdom of hard-won peace. In time, he would know the story of the Blue Valley and the story of his other uncle, and the story of his grandparents. But until then, he would think of all the gods were kind and his father never cried. His uncle would carve his hide into the marble column of the ivy-covered pavilion where he learned how to paint, and he would wonder why his father's brother would turn away whenever he passed the almost faded marks of the boy that had stood there before him. The hair of the angel of Death's kingdom, and all their hairs after him, would not have gilded hair or eyes like frozen tundra. They would have gentle hands and would forgive easily. They would be raised on honey and apple pies, and stories about frogs in the rain, and the wheel would never break them. And on the night before an ancient crown would be placed upon their brow, those that came before them would press a gift into their hand, and would be their inheritance. So when a winged man would appear from the north, days or years or eons from now, he would find a familiar stone around the neck of a child that he would recognize right away, by the familiar shape of their smile, and he would know he was home. He had a life before this, a mother, a father, a home, sisters, and a brother. But what he had now was alright too. He stood alone in front of his bedroom mirror, combing his hair back from his face to braid it for the day, tucking it behind an ear where a sapphire earring hung, catching the sunlight. He paused when he saw it, leaned in close just to make sure it wasn't a trick of the light or the lingering traces of the dream. He blinked once, twice, his mortal heart catching in his throat. There, nestled among the pink strands, delicate as a bird's wing, was a single gray hair. If he listened carefully, he could hear his brother coming down the hallway, looking for him, but this moment was his alone. Half sobbing, half laughing, he fell against his chair and closed his eyes against the sudden sting of tears. He could see, in his mind, a field of flowers under an open sky, a place made for waiting, where all the finished stories went, where he would go someday too. A knock came at his door. Technoblade began to smile. God. It's a good story.
Yeah. Is that the end?
That's the end.
No!
Is the end Techno getting old? Oh my god. God. I didn't see that one coming. Yeah.
Well, I have to get ready for work stream, so I'll send you somewhere else. Do Ant.
And Frost.
Ant Frost, yep.
Oh my god.
Yeah. I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.
Bye, stream.